Hi, I'm Sean Mooney. I'm today joined by my colleague Andy Wood, and we're going to be talking about maths. So Andy, what has changed for maths this year?
That's a good question, Sean. If you look at the sector as a whole, the number of maths hasn't really changed this year. There's been a net increase in 2 multi-academies. For single academy schools, though, there's been a decline of 40. So there's been the pre-existing pattern where we're seeing maths increase and single academies decline. But this year's really slowed down, and that's largely because of the impacts of COVID. Schools' plans have been put on hold whilst they've dealt with COVID, and equally, where the regulators have previously carried out school inspections, there's been far fewer of those. So the rebrokerage of academies from becoming either single academies or small multi-academies into larger maths has really slowed down in the current year. And the key question I think there is what's going to happen next year, because I think as these inspections come back through, there will be greater rebrokerage, and I expect the number of multi-academies to increase again, and the average number of schools in those trusts to increase. I think in 2020, the average was around about 7, and it's up to 7.6 in 2021. So still a sizable increase despite COVID there. But as we come out of the real impacts of COVID, which will hopefully will be from this point forwards, then I think schools will be able to get back on track, and multi-academies in particular, in terms of strategic plans and continue the growth that we're expecting to see.
You mentioned there around the size of maths. Are we noticing with maths becoming bigger that there's an increased uptake of Gag-Pooling?
There has been an increased uptake in Gag-Pooling. Not a massive increase. I think it dates back to 2017 when we saw our first Academy Trust Gag-Pool. We're seeing more and more trusts, so I think it's up to around about 14% that we're seeing this year that have actually Gag-Pooled. And other trusts as well, not just Gag-Pool, but actually reserves pool as well, which is a variation on a similar theme. But certainly when I'm talking to academies, there's a lot more interest in it at the moment. And I'd expect that in 2022, we'll see another further increase in that percentage.
Thinking about the different types of maths that we see, what are we seeing in terms of reserves, the trend on reserves for larger and smaller maths?
That's interesting because there's a clear pattern there. And what we're seeing is that the larger the maths, the less average reserves per pupil that trust actually has. And I think that follows a form of logic, really, because if you think about it, if you're a 25-school multi-academy trust, then you can absorb some of those risks across the actual width of the trust. If you're a single academy trust, then you're likely to be wanting to carry a higher contingency fund. So an example I can give on that, which I've given in previous examples, is where you might have a boiler failure in one school that might cost you £100,000. It's very unlikely you can have 25 schools with a boiler failure in each at the same time. So you can almost self-insure something like that. So you don't need to carry those reserves forward to the same sort of level in larger maths.
Thinking about the future, if you were a trustee of a math, what comes next?
I think the immediate concern, is getting back to some sort of normality after COVID, and dust off your strategic plans, revisit those and make sure you've got a clear plan as to where you want that trust to go in the future. I think there's going to be some mild pressure from the government to continue expansion, but I think talking to many of my multi-academy trust clients, they've got expansion plans themselves. I think if you're not already considering it, Gag-Pooling is going to be something on the agenda to consider in the future. And if you are considering it, looking at how centralised you are and how you can maximise the benefits of centralisation. I think those are going to be the key aspects going forwards.
Thanks, Andy. Some really useful insights there. If you have any more questions, please feel free to speak to your local advisor.